They left her to die in the snow with nothing but contempt and a half-dead wolf cub she refused to abandon. In a world where shifting into your wolf meant everything, Ardenvale was the broken daughter no pack wanted, too weak to transform, too stubborn to disappear quietly. But when that dying cub turned out to be the cursed heir of the most feared alpha king in the north, her act of defiance didn't just save a life. It shattered every rule she'd ever been forced to live by. This is the story of how the girl they threw away became the queen who rebuilt a kingdom. Stay until the end to see how she did it, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Hit that like button. You won't regret it. The cold came first. It always did in the Pale Reach, that stretch of frozen wasteland where winter never really ended and wolves ruled everything that moved. Ardenvale had lived her entire 17 years knowing cold, not just the kind that bit at your fingers and turned your breath to fog, but the deeper kind. The kind that lived in people's eyes when they looked at you and decided you weren't worth the trouble. She stood now in the courtyard of her family's settlement, a ragged collection of timber lodges clustered against the base of a granite cliff. Around her, the pack gathered in a loose circle, their breath steaming in the early morning air. Nobody met her eyes. That was normal. Arden had stopped expecting eye contact around the time she turned 12 and still hadn't shifted. 5 years later, she still couldn't. "Get moving," her father said. His voice carried no particular emotion, not anger, not regret, just the flat tone of a man completing an unpleasant task. He stood with his arms crossed, a broad-shouldered man whose wolf was so close to the surface that his eyes flickered amber, even in human form. Handlers waiting. Arden didn't move. Not out of defiance exactly. More like her legs had forgotten how. Her mother stood beside her father, face carefully blank. She'd stopped pretending to care about a year ago, right around the time Arden's younger sister had her first shift. A beautiful silver wolf that had the whole pack howling in celebration. That was what a daughter was supposed to be. Strong, valuable. Someone you could trade to another pack for alliance, for protection, for respect. Not this. Arden, her father's voice sharpened. Don't make this harder than it is. Harder for who? She wanted to ask, but she'd learned years ago that talking back only made things worse. So she nodded, pulled her threadbare coat tighter, and started walking. The handler waited at the settlement's edge. He was a squat, thick-necked man named Torvin, sent by the Blackwater Pack to collect what Arden's father had promised them. A body. Any body. Arden's father had debts, apparently. The kind that required payment in flesh. This her? Torvin looked her up and down with all the interest of someone inspecting a lame horse. She's healthy enough, her father said. Works hard, doesn't complain. Both lies. Arden had been sick twice this winter already, coughing fits that left her dizzy and weak. And she complained constantly, though only in her own head where no one could punish her for it. Torvin grunted. Blackwater wanted a wolf. You're giving me a broken shifter. Blackwater wanted a warm body for their breeding program, her father shot back. What they do with her after that isn't my concern. We're settled, Torvin. This clears the debt. Breeding program. The words hit Arden like a physical blow, though she'd suspected as much. The Blackwater Pack controlled the southern forest territories, and they needed numbers. Needed them bad enough to take defective goods. Girls who couldn't shift still had wombs. Still could carry wolf pups if the father was strong enough. She felt her breakfast threatening to come back up. Torvin shrugged. Your business. Come on, girl. We've got 3 days' walk ahead. Arden looked back once. Her mother had already turned away, heading back toward the main lodge. Her father stood watching, but there was nothing in his face. No goodbye, no apology, not even relief. Just a man watching a problem walk out of his life. She turned forward and followed Torvin into the woods. Oh. The first day wasn't so bad. Torvin barely spoke, which suited Arden fine. They walked south through pine forests so thick the snow barely reached the ground, following game trails that wound between ancient trees. Her feet hurt. Her boots had holes in them, and she hadn't had the courage to ask for new ones before leaving, but she'd walked in worse conditions. By nightfall, they'd reached a rocky overhang that offered some shelter from the wind. Torvin built a small fire and tossed her a piece of dried meat that was more gristle than anything else. Eat, he said. We're moving faster tomorrow. Arden gnawed on the meat and said nothing. Around them, the forest was alive with sounds, branches creaking, snow falling in soft clumps from overladen boughs, and somewhere far off, the howl of a wolf pack on the hunt. She wondered if they were Blackwater wolves, wondered if in a few months she'd be one of them, pregnant with some stranger's child, locked in a breeding kennel like livestock. The meat turned to ash in her mouth. "You gonna cry?" Torvin asked, not looking at her. "No." "Good. Crying won't help anything." She wanted to tell him she'd learned that lesson years ago, but she kept her mouth shut and stared into the fire until her eyes burned. The second day was worse. The storm came in just after dawn, a howling blizzard that turned the world white and vicious. Torvin cursed steadily as he pushed forward, one hand gripping Arden's wrist to keep her from falling behind. The wind tore at them with claws made of ice, and within an hour Arden had lost feeling in her fingers. "There's a cave system ahead," Torvin shouted over the wind. "We'll wait it out there." But they never reached the caves. The attack came from downwind, fast and brutal. 3 wolves, rogues, Arden realized with cold terror, burst from the white curtain of snow and slammed into Torvin before he could shift. He went down hard, and his scream cut off with a wet, horrible sound. Arden ran. She didn't think, didn't plan, just turned and ran into the storm, her heart hammering so hard it felt like it would break through her ribs. Behind her, she heard snarling, tearing sounds. Torvin had stopped screaming. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs shook, until she couldn't remember which direction she'd come from. The world was nothing but white and wind and cold, and when she finally stumbled and fell, she didn't have the strength to get back up. This was it then. This was where she died. Not in some breeding kennel, at least. Not used up and discarded. Just frozen. Lost. Forgotten. The snow felt almost warm as it covered her. She woke to silence. For a long moment, Arden thought she was dead. But dead people probably didn't hurt this much. Every part of her body screamed in protest as she tried to move. Her hands were white and numb, her lips cracked and bleeding. She'd somehow wedged herself into a small hollow between 2 fallen logs, and the snow had drifted over her like a blanket. That's probably what had saved her life. She clawed her way out, gasping, her vision swimming. The storm had passed. Around her, the forest lay still and silent under fresh snow that sparkled in weak afternoon sunlight. No sign of Torvin, no sign of the rogues, just endless white. Arden stood there shaking, trying to figure out what to do. She had no supplies, no food, no idea where she was. The smart thing would be to try and backtrack, find her way to her father's settlement, beg them to take her back. Except they wouldn't. She knew that with cold certainty. Her father had made his choice. If she showed up again, she'd just be another mouth to feed, another problem to solve. They might kill her themselves just to be done with it. So she started walking. South, she thought, or maybe east. Did it matter? She'd gone maybe half a mile when she heard it. A sound, faint, almost lost in the whisper of wind through branches. A whimper. Arden stopped, listening. There it was again. A small, pained sound coming from somewhere to her left. Every survival instinct she had screamed at her to ignore it and keep walking. Wounded animals were dangerous. Dying animals even more so. But she'd been a wounded animal her whole life, and nobody had ever stopped for her. She pushed through a stand of young pines and found the source, a wolf cub. It was half buried in a snowdrift, so small it might have been only a few months old. Its fur was matted with ice and blood. One of its back legs twisted at an angle that made Arden's stomach turn. As she approached, it lifted its head weakly and fixed her with eyes that were too blue, too aware, too human. Not a normal wolf cub, a shifter child. "Oh no," Arden whispered. "No, no, no." The cub whimpered again and tried to crawl toward her, dragging its broken leg. It left a thin trail of blood in the snow. Arden's first thought was to run. If this was a shifter child, that meant it had a pack, a family, people who would come looking. And if they found a broken, packless girl hovering over their injured cub, they'd assume the worst. They'd tear her apart. But as she stood there frozen in indecision, the cub's eyes fluttered closed. Its breathing went shallow and ragged. It was dying. Just like she was dying, in a different way. Both of them discarded. Both of them alone. "Damn it," Arden said, and knelt in the snow beside the cub. She had no medical training, no supplies, but she'd grown up in a settlement where injuries were common and healers were scarce, so she knew the basics. The cub's leg was definitely broken, but there was no bone sticking through the skin. That was something. The blood seemed to be coming from a gash on its shoulder, deep, but not arterial. She tore strips from the bottom of her coat and wrapped the shoulder wound as tight as she dared. The cub whined, but didn't fight her. For the leg, she found 2 straight branches and used more fabric to fashion a crude splint. "This is stupid," she told the cub as she worked, her fingers clumsy with cold. "We're both going to die out here. You know that, right?" The cub's eyes opened again, fixed on her face with that eerie intelligence. "Yeah, you know," Arden muttered. "You're probably smarter than I am." When she'd done everything she could, she sat back and assessed the situation. The cub was still dying. She could see it in the way its chest rose and fell too fast, in the glassy look of its eyes. It needed warmth, real medical care, its pack. But the storm had covered any tracks that might have led to them. Arden looked around, thinking hard. Staying here meant freezing to death. Moving meant carrying an injured cub through hostile territory with no destination in mind. Both options were terrible. She chose the less terrible one and scooped the cub into her arms. It was heavier than it looked, solid muscle under blood-matted fur. It whimpered as she lifted it, but then settled against her chest, seeking warmth. Arden tucked it inside her coat as best she could and started walking. She had no plan, no hope, but she kept moving anyway because stopping meant dying, and she'd already died so many times in so many ways that she was sick of it. The sun was setting when she saw the smoke. At first, Arden thought she was hallucinating. 3 days without real food, 2 nights without proper shelter. Her mind was probably playing tricks. But as she stumbled closer, the smoke resolved into something real, a thin column rising from somewhere beyond a ridge. Settlement. Had to be. She should have been relieved. Instead, dread curled in her gut. Unknown settlements were dangerous, especially for a lone, packless girl. But the cub in her arms had stopped whimpering an hour ago, and its breathing sounded wrong, too shallow, too fast. She didn't have a choice anymore. The ridge turned out to be the edge of a massive clearing, and what lay beyond made Arden stop dead in her tracks. It wasn't a settlement. It was a fortress. Stone walls 20 feet high, studded with iron and crowned with sharpened stakes, guard towers at each corner manned by wolves in human form carrying crossbows. The main gate was solid oak reinforced with steel, currently sealed tight. Everything about the place screamed power, danger, keep out. And flying from the highest tower, a banner she recognized from stories whispered around winter fires, black wolf on a blood-red field, the Draven pack. "No," Arden whispered. "No, no, no." Of all the packs in the north, the Dravens were the worst, the most brutal. Led by an alpha king who'd supposedly killed his own father to take power, who ruled through fear and violence, who took what he wanted and destroyed anyone who stood in his way. She'd literally walked into the mouth of hell. The cub stirred weakly against her chest, and Arden looked down at it. In the fading light, she could see how pale its gums had gone, how its heartbeat fluttered like a dying bird. "Your pack, isn't it?" she asked softly. "That's why you were out there." Something happened. The cub's blue eyes opened one more time, pleading. Arden stood at the edge of the clearing, shaking. The smart thing, the sane thing, would be to leave the cub at the gate and run, let its pack find it, save herself. But she thought about Torvin's body being torn apart by rogues, about her father's blank face as he sold her off, about 17 years of being the broken thing nobody wanted, the burden everyone endured. She thought about how the cub had looked at her with human awareness and trusted her anyway. "Screw it," she said, and walked toward the gate. She made it maybe 30 feet before the guards appeared. They materialized from the shadows at the base of the walls, 4 massive men, each one radiating the barely contained violence of dominant wolves. They formed a semicircle around her, blocking any escape. "State your business," the largest one said. His voice was flat, professional. His eyes were on the bundle in her arms. Arden's mouth had gone dry, but she forced words out. "I found this cub in the forest. It's hurt. It needs help. Put it down. Step back. It's dying. I said, put it down." The guard's hand moved to the sword at his belt. Now! Arden's arms tightened reflexively around the cub. I'm not going to hurt it. I helped it. I just want... Last warning, girl. The other guards had drawn weapons now. Arden saw her death written clearly in their stances, in the cold efficiency of their movements. They thought she was a threat, an enemy, someone who'd stolen or hurt their pack's child. She should have run when she had the chance. The main gate burst open with a crash that made everyone flinch. A man strode through. No, not a man. An alpha. You could see it in everything about him, the way he moved like violence given form, the way the guards immediately stepped back, the way the air itself seemed to press down heavy and dangerous. Kyle Draven. Had to be. Nobody else could radiate that much raw power. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with black hair pulled back in a rough tail and a scar that ran from his left temple down to his jaw. His eyes were the color of winter ice, and when they locked on Arden, she felt her knees try to buckle. Then his gaze dropped to the bundle in her arms, and something in his expression shifted. Theron, he said. His voice was rough, like gravel and smoke. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and reached for the cub. Arden flinched back instinctively, which was stupid. He could have ripped her apart without effort, but her arms wouldn't let go. He's hurt, she heard herself say. His leg is broken, and there's a gash on his shoulder. I tried to stop the bleeding, but give him to me? Not a request. A command that hit her like a physical force. This time, she managed to obey. The alpha took the cub with surprising gentleness, pulling back the makeshift bandages to assess the damage. His jaw tightened. Marcus, he said to one of the guards, get the healer, now. The guard vanished at a run. Arden stood there shaking, waiting to be killed. But the alpha wasn't looking at her anymore. He'd turned and was striding back toward the gate, the cub cradled against his chest. Sir? One of the remaining guards said. The girl? Bring her. 2 words, spoken without looking back. Hands gripped Arden's arms before she could process what was happening. The guards hauled her forward, dragging her through the gate into a massive courtyard lit by torches. The fortress was even more intimidating from inside, all sharp angles and dark stone and armed wolves watching her with predatory interest. They pulled her into a great hall that could have fit her entire settlement inside it twice over. Tapestries hung from the walls depicting battle scenes and wolf hunts. A fire roared in a hearth big enough to roast an elk. And in the center of it all, the alpha laid the cub gently on a long wooden table. An old woman appeared, the healer, Arden guessed. She bent over the cub with practiced efficiency, her hands glowing with a faint blue light that marked her as a gifted healer, one of the rare wolves born with magic in their blood. Arden watched, barely breathing, as the woman worked. After what felt like an eternity, the healer stepped back and nodded. He'll live, she said. The leg will heal clean, but it'll take time. Someone did good work stabilizing him, probably saved his life. The alpha's gaze swung back to Arden. You did this? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Where did you find him? About 6 miles north, in a snowdrift. I don't know what happened to him, but he was taken. The alpha's voice had gone lethal. 3 days ago, rogues attacked one of our hunting parties. They killed 2 guards and took my son. The world tilted. Your son? My son. He moved closer, and Arden had to fight the urge to bolt. Who are you? What pack? I'm nobody. No pack. I was traveling with a handler and we got separated in the storm. You're lying. I'm not. You're terrified. Your clothes are 3 sizes too big. You've got old bruises on your wrist and you smell like someone who's been abandoned. His eyes narrowed. You were being traded, weren't you? Sold off by your pack. Arden's silence was answer enough. The alpha studied her for a long moment. Then, shockingly, he turned to the healer. Get her warm, fed, have someone find her proper clothes. Sir? The healer's eyebrows shot up. She saved my son's life. We owe her a debt. With respect, Alpha, we don't know anything about her. She could be a lot of things. Right now, she's a half-frozen girl who did what 24 of my trained warriors couldn't. He looked back at Arden, and something in his expression gentled just slightly. You'll stay here. Tonight, at least. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. Before Arden could respond, he was gone, disappearing through a side door and leaving her standing in the great hall surrounded by suspicious guards and one very confused healer. The healer, her name was Mira, Arden learned, took her to a small room in the fortress's east wing and brought her hot water for washing, clean clothes, and a plate of food that made Arden's eyes sting with gratitude. Real bread, roasted meat, vegetables that weren't half-rotted. Eat slowly, Mira warned. You'll make yourself sick otherwise. Arden tried to obey, but her hand shook so badly she could barely hold the fork. Now that the adrenaline was fading, reality was crashing in. She'd walked into the territory of the North's most dangerous alpha. She was alive, fed, warm, but for how long? What would happen tomorrow? She fell asleep in a real bed for the first time in months, still half convinced she'd wake up to find it had all been a fever dream. Sit. When morning came, a guard was waiting outside her door. Alpha wants to see you, he said. Not hostile exactly, but not friendly either. Come on. Arden followed him through a maze of corridors to a private chamber on the fortress's upper level. The Alpha sat behind a massive desk covered in papers and maps. The cub, Theron, lay on a cushion near the fire, bandaged and splinted but awake. His tail thumped once when he saw Arden. Sit, the Alpha said, gesturing to a chair. Arden sat, her heart in her throat. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, my son hasn't shifted back since the attack. The healer says it's trauma. Sometimes young shifters get stuck in one form when something terrible happens. I'm sorry. Don't be. You're the only person he'll let near him without trying to bite. The Alpha's jaw tightened. He won't let me touch him. His own father. But you? He calms down the second you walk in the room. Arden glanced at Theron, who was watching her with those two blue eyes. I don't understand. Neither do I. But here's the situation. My son needs care. Constant care, until he heals enough to shift back. And apparently, you're the only one he'll accept. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. I'm offering you a position. Stay here. Look after Theron. In return, you'll have food, shelter, protection, everything you need. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. What's the catch? Arden asked. A ghost of a smile crossed the Alpha's face. Smart girl. The catch is that if you hurt him, if anything happens to him while he's in your care, I'll kill you myself, slowly. That's fair, Arden heard herself say, which was insane. None of this was fair. But it was better than freezing to death in the woods or being shoved into a breeding kennel. One more thing. The Alpha stood, and the full weight of his presence settled over her like a physical thing. My pack doesn't know the full truth about Theron. They know he was taken. They don't know he's cursed. Cursed? The rogues who took him were led by a witch. She did something to him, cursed him to stay wolf until... He stopped, his expression going carefully blank. Until certain conditions are met. Conditions that may never be met. What conditions? That's not your concern. All you need to know is that you're going to help my son survive this, whatever it takes. Understood? Arden looked at Theron, who'd made his way over to her chair and was pressing his head against her leg. She reached down carefully and touched his fur. He leaned into her hand, eyes closing. Understood, she said. And just like that, the unwanted daughter became the only thing standing between a cursed prince and death. She had no idea how badly that would change everything. The fortress didn't welcome her. It tolerated her barely, like a body trying to decide whether to reject a foreign object or let it settle somewhere it didn't quite belong. Arden learned this within the first hour. Mira had given her a room, small, drafty, tucked in a corner of the servants' wing where the stone walls wept moisture and the fireplace smoked more than it heated. The clothes they'd found for her were cast-offs, patched and faded, though still better than anything she'd owned before. A guard escorted her to the great hall for breakfast, where the pack ate together in a chaos of noise and bodies and aggression that made her want to crawl under the nearest table. She got her food, porridge and bread, and looked for somewhere to sit. Every bench was full, every face turned away when she approached. Finally, a woman with iron gray hair and scars across her knuckles gestured to an empty spot. Arden sat gratefully, only to realize the woman wasn't being kind. She was sizing her up like a predator, deciding if prey was worth the effort. "You're the stray," the woman said. Not a question. "My name is Arden." "Didn't ask your name, asked what you are." The woman tore into her bread with teeth that were just slightly too sharp. "Word is you can't shift. That true?" Every conversation within earshot had gone quiet. Arden felt the weight of dozens of eyes. "It's true," she said. "And the Alpha's keeping you here anyway." To nursemaid his cursed brat. The woman smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. "You know what we do with broken shifters in most packs?" "I can guess." "Then you know you're walking on borrowed time, girl. You're here because you're useful. The second that stops..." She drew a finger across her throat. "Best remember that." Arden forced herself to take a bite of porridge, even though it tasted like sawdust. Around her, conversation resumed, but the message had been delivered. She wasn't pack, she was a tool, disposable. She finished eating as fast as she could and got out. Theron was waiting in her room when she returned, somehow having escaped whatever attendant was supposed to be watching him. He sat by the cold fireplace, tail curled around his paws, those blue eyes tracking her every movement. "You're not supposed to be here," Arden said, though she was relieved to see him. At least someone in this place didn't look at her like she was something stuck to their boot. The cub limped over and pressed against her legs. She could feel him shaking, not from cold, but from something deeper. Fear, maybe, or pain that went beyond the physical. She sat down on the floor beside him and carefully checked his bandages. Mira had done good work. The wounds were clean, already starting to heal with the accelerated speed of shifter metabolism. But the leg worried her. It was setting, but Theron kept trying to put weight on it too soon. "You need to rest," she told him. "I know you don't like being stuck like this, but if you don't let that leg heal properly, you'll be limping for the rest of your life. You understand me?" Theron huffed and looked away, which Arden decided to interpret as sullen agreement. She spent the rest of the morning with him, talking about nothing in particular. It felt stupid at first, carrying on a one-sided conversation with a wolf cub, but Theron seemed to calm when she spoke. His shaking would stop, his breathing would even out. So she talked about growing up in the Pale Reach, about the settlement and the endless winter, carefully editing out the worst parts. She talked about the few things she'd loved, the rare days when the sun broke through the clouds and turned the ice to crystal, the northern lights that sometimes danced across the sky, the sound of wind through pine branches. She didn't mention being traded away like livestock. Didn't mention Torvin's screams or 3 days of walking through a blizzard with no idea where she was going. Some things didn't need to be said out loud. Around midday, a knock rattled the door. Arden opened it to find a young woman holding a tray of food, bread, cheese, dried meat. She shoved it at Arden without making eye contact. "Alpha says you're to eat in your room," the woman muttered. "Says it's safer." "Safer for who?" The woman's eyes flicked to Theron, then back to Arden. "Both of you, some of the pack, they're not happy about you being here." "I noticed. Just stay out of trouble. Don't give them an excuse." She turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, what you did, finding Theron, bringing him back, that took guts. Most people would have left him to die." She was gone before Arden could respond. Arden shared the food with Theron, who ate with more appetite than he'd shown since she'd found him. That was good. Meant he was healing. She tried not to think about what would happen when he was fully healed, when he didn't need her anymore. One problem at a time. But 3 days passed in a strange kind of limbo. Arden spent most of her time with Theron, helping him exercise his injured leg, changing his bandages, keeping him company. The cub followed her everywhere she went, a small shadow that refused to leave her side. At night, he slept curled against her on the narrow bed, his warmth the only thing that made the cold room bearable. During the day, she tried to stay invisible. She learned the fortress's rhythms, when the guards changed shifts, when the training yard was busiest, when the kitchens would hand out food without questions. She learned which hallways to avoid and which servants might tolerate her presence. She also learned that Kyle Draven was more complicated than the stories suggested. She'd see him in the courtyard sometimes, drilling with his warriors. He fought like violence was a language he'd been born speaking, fast, brutal, efficient. But afterward, he'd sit with the injured and make sure they got proper care. He knew every pack member's name. When a young wolf got knocked unconscious during a particularly rough sparring match, Kyle was the one who carried him to the healer personally. He checked on Theron every evening, though the visits were brief and awkward. The cub wouldn't go near him, would back into a corner and bare his teeth if Kale tried to approach. It clearly hurt the alpha, though he hid it behind a mask of cold control. "How is he?" Kyle would ask, and Arden would give him updates on Theron's physical healing while both of them ignored the deeper wound neither knew how to address. On the fourth day, everything changed. Arden woke to shouting. She jerked upright, heart hammering. Beside her, Theron was already on his feet, hackles raised and growling low in his throat. The commotion was coming from outside, dozens of voices, angry and aggressive. She threw on her clothes and cracked open the door. A servant rushed past, face pale. "What's happening?" Arden called after her. "Council meeting," the woman said without stopping. "Emergency session. Something's wrong." Arden knew she should stay in her room. Keep her head down. But Theron was already pushing past her, limping down the hallway toward the noise. She had no choice but to follow. The great hall was packed. The entire pack seemed to have crammed inside, all of them focused on the raised platform at the far end where Kyle stood facing a semicircle of older wolves. The pack council, Arden guessed. Their expressions ranged from angry to hostile. "This is madness, Alpha," one of them was saying. A man with white hair and a voice like gravel. "You're putting the entire pack at risk for one child. My son is not one child. He's the heir. He's cursed, and as long as he stays in that form, he's a liability." The old man gestured sharply. "The witch who did this to him works for the Blackwater Pack. This was a targeted attack. They wanted to weaken us, and by all the ancestors, it's working. You're distracted, vulnerable. We need to cut our losses and—" "Finish that sentence," Kale said softly, "and I'll remove your tongue." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The old councilman stepped back, but another wolf, a woman with scars across her face, moved forward. "With respect, Alpha, Gregor has a point. The curse can't be broken by conventional means. We've consulted every healer in the territory. None of them can help." She paused. "There are other options, harder options. But if we don't act soon, I am not giving up on my son." Each word landed like a hammer blow. "No one's asking you to give up. We're asking you to be realistic." The woman's voice softened slightly. "The witch's curse was specific. It can only be broken by true love, by someone willing to sacrifice everything for him. And that's not something we can force. It might never happen." The crowd murmured agreement. Arden, pressed against the back wall with Theron trembling against her legs, felt her stomach drop. True love, sacrifice. That was the condition Kyle had mentioned, the impossible thing that might never come. "Then we wait," Kale said. "We protect him. We give him time. Time is what we don't have." Gregor slammed his fist on the platform. "The Blackwater Pack is moving troops to the southern border. The rogues are getting bolder. And you're spending your days worrying about a cub who may never shift back instead of leading this pack. I can do both. Can you? Because from where I'm standing, you've brought a broken, packless girl into our home to babysit your cursed son while the world falls apart around us. That's not leadership. That's desperation." The crowd's murmur grew louder, more agitated. Arden saw heads nodding, heard voices agreeing. They wanted Theron gone. They wanted her gone. They wanted Kale to stop being a father and start being the ruthless alpha king they needed. Theron bolted. One second he was pressed against Arden's legs. The next he was racing through the crowd toward the platform, his injured leg making him stumble but not stopping him. Wolves scattered, cursing. Theron reached Kyle and planted himself between the alpha and the council, teeth bared, a growl rumbling from his small chest. The hall went silent. Kyle looked down at his son, really looked at him, and something in his expression cracked. He knelt slowly, carefully, making himself small and non-threatening. "Theron," he said quietly, "it's all right. No one's going to hurt you." But Theron wasn't growling at the council. He was growling at Kyle. Arden watched from the back of the hall as understanding dawned on the alpha's face. His son wasn't protecting him. His son was protecting the pack from him. Theron thought Kyle was the threat, thought his own father might hurt him. "I would never—" Kale's voice broke. He reached out, and Theron snapped at his hand. Not a serious bite, more warning than anything, but it might as well have been a knife to the heart. Cale stood abruptly and turned to the council. His face had gone blank again, all emotion locked away behind that iron control. "We're done here. Meeting adjourned." "Alpha, we haven't finished." "I said we're done." Power rolled off him in waves, making every wolf in the room drop their eyes and bare their necks in submission. Except Gregor, who held his ground. "You're making a mistake," the old wolf said, "and mistakes like this get people killed. Then I'll bear that weight, like I bear everything else." Cale's gaze swept the room. "Anyone who can't live with my decisions is free to leave. The southern border stays open." He walked out without waiting for a response, leaving the council sputtering and the pack buzzing with tension. Theron stood alone on the platform, still growling, until Arden pushed through the crowd and scooped him up. He struggled briefly, then went limp in her arms, all the fight draining out of him. "Come on," she whispered. "Let's get out of here." She carried him back to her room, hyper-aware of the stares following them. The hostility had gotten worse. Before, she'd been an annoyance. Now she was a symbol of everything wrong with their alpha's leadership. This wasn't going to end well. That night, Arden couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to Theron's breathing and trying to figure out what to do. She was trapped. If she left, Theron would have no one, and without her, he'd probably stop eating again, stop trying to heal. But if she stayed, she was putting a target on both their backs. The pack wanted them gone. The council wanted them gone. Even Kyle, in his own way, probably wished things were different. A soft knock made her sit up. She lit a candle and opened the door to find Mira standing there with a bundle under her arm. "Can't sleep either?" the healer asked. "Something like that." Mira came in without waiting for an invitation and set the bundle on the table. It was clothes, traveling clothes, warm and practical, a pack with supplies, a water skin. "What is this?" Arden asked. "A way out, if you want it." Mira's expression was unreadable. "There's a shepherd's hut about 10 miles east, abandoned this time of year. You could hole up there with the cub until spring, then make your way south. Blackwater territory is dangerous, but there are smaller packs beyond that. Neutral territory. Places where a girl and a wolf cub could disappear." "Why are you helping me?" "Because I've seen what happens when packs turn on their own. It's never pretty." Mira moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered courtyard. "You saved Theron's life. You've been taking care of him when no one else could. That counts for something. But it won't matter if Gregor and his supporters decide you're too much of a problem. Would they really hurt us? They'd hurt you and call it protecting the pack. Theron..." Mira's jaw tightened. "They'd frame it as mercy. Put him out of his misery before the curse kills him anyway." Arden's blood went cold. Kyle would never allow that. Kale is one man. A powerful man, but still just one. If enough of the pack turns against him, he'll have to choose between his son and his people. And we both know which one he'll choose, even if it destroys him. The candle flame flickered, throwing shadows across the walls. Arden thought about running again. Thought about grabbing Theron and disappearing into the frozen wilderness, trying to survive on scraps and hope. She'd done it before. She could do it again. But something in her rebelled at the idea. She was so tired of running, so tired of being thrown away, moved around, treated like she didn't matter. "No," she heard herself say. Mira turned, surprised. "No? I'm not leaving, not unless Kyle himself tells me to go." Arden looked at Theron, who'd woken up and was watching them with those too aware eyes. "That cub trusted me when he had no reason to. He's still trusting me. I'm not going to abandon him just because things got hard. Things are going to get harder. Then they get harder. I've survived worse." It wasn't entirely true. She wasn't sure she had survived worse, but saying it out loud made it feel more real. She'd spent 17 years being the broken thing everyone else gave up on. Maybe it was time to stop accepting that. Mira studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But keep the supplies anyway, just in case." After the healer left, Arden lay back down and stared at the ceiling. Theron crawled up and pressed his nose against her hand. "I'm probably making a huge mistake," she told him. "You know that, right?" His tail thumped once against the blanket. "Yeah, that's what I thought," said. Morning brought new problems. Arden woke to find her door blocked. Not locked, just 3 large wolves in human form standing in the hallway, arms crossed. "Alpha wants to see you," one of them said. "Now." They escorted her to Kael's private study, a room she'd never been in before. It was surprisingly sparse, just a desk, some chairs, and shelves lined with books and maps. Kael stood by the window, his back to the door. "Leave us," he said to the guards. They obeyed immediately, though Arden noticed they stationed themselves right outside. "Where's Theron?" she asked. "With Mira. He's safe." Kael turned, and Arden was startled by how exhausted he looked, like he hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk about what happened yesterday. I didn't mean for him to interrupt the meeting. I know, he was protecting you, or trying to." Kael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so tired and human, it made him seem less like a terrifying alpha and more like a father drowning in problems he didn't know how to solve. "The council is right about one thing. This situation isn't sustainable. The pack is turning against you, and by extension, against my son. Against me." "So what are you saying? You want me to leave?" "I'm saying I don't know what I want." He moved to the desk and leaned against it, arms crossed. 6 months ago, my mate died. Theron's mother. She was killed by the same rogues who later came back for him. The witch who cursed him? She was their leader. She wanted revenge for something my father did decades ago, before I was even born. I'm sorry. Don't be. You didn't cause this. His jaw tightened. But you're caught in it now. And I don't know how to protect you and protect my pack and save my son all at the same time. Arden thought about Mira's offer, about the escape route sitting in her room, about how easy it would be to just walk away and let Kael make his impossible choices without her complicating things further. Instead, she said, "What if you didn't have to do it all at once?" Kael's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "The council is worried you're distracted, that you're not focusing on pack business." Arden spoke carefully, feeling her way through an idea that was forming even as she said it out loud. "So stop being distracted. Handle the Blackwater situation. Deal with the rogues. Be the alpha they need. And Theron? I'll take care of Theron. That's what you brought me here for, right? Let me do my job." She took a breath. "But I need something in return." She could see the exact moment Kael's interest sharpened. He straightened, giving her his full attention. "Go on." "Authority. Right now I'm just some girl you're keeping around out of charity. The pack doesn't respect that. They don't respect me. But if you make it clear that I'm here by your order, that I speak with your voice when it comes to Theron's care." She shrugged. "It won't make them like me, but it might make them think twice about causing problems. You want me to give you rank. I want you to give me protection. There's a difference." Kael considered this, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "Done. From this moment, you are Theron's official guardian. Anyone who interferes with you answers to me directly. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You're painting a bigger target on yourself." He moved toward the door, then paused. "The curse. The witch said it could be broken by true love and sacrifice. Do you know what that means?" "I can guess." "Then you know it's not something that can be forced or faked. It has to be real." His voice went rough. "I can't save him. I'm his father, and I can't save him. The curse won't respond to that kind of love. It has to be something else." Arden thought about the way Theron followed her everywhere, the way he calmed when she spoke, the way he'd growled at his own father to protect her. "He trusts me," she said quietly. "I don't know if that's enough, but it's what we have." "Then make it enough." Kael opened the door. "Because if you can't, I'll have to make choices I don't want to make. And I promise you, girl, you won't like any of them." It wasn't quite a threat, more like a warning, an acknowledgement that they were both walking a knife's edge and any misstep would be fatal. Arden left the study with her new authority and the weight of impossible expectations. The guards fell in behind her as she walked back to her room, and she could feel their resentment like heat at her back. This was going to get worse before it got better, if it ever got better at all. News of her new status spread through the fortress like wildfire. By evening, everyone knew that the broken packless girl had been given rank by the Alpha himself. The reactions ranged from disbelief to outrage. Arden heard them whispering as she passed, saw the way they stared. One woman spat on the ground behind her, a gesture of contempt that was impossible to miss. But no one actually stopped her. No one directly challenged her, because behind the contempt was fear, not of Arden herself, but of what she represented. Kael's favor, his protection. Cross her, and you crossed him. It was a fragile kind of power, but it was more than she'd ever had before. That night, she returned to her room to find it had been trashed. Her few belongings scattered, her mattress slashed, the water in her basin fouled with dirt. A message scrawled on the wall in something dark and ugly. Get out while you can. Theron was huddled in the corner, shaking. Someone had gotten to him too, his bandages torn, his wounded leg bleeding again where he'd tried to defend himself. Arden's vision went red. She gathered Theron carefully, checking his injuries. The bleeding wasn't serious, but the message was clear. Her new authority meant nothing if people could hurt the one thing she was supposed to protect. She carried Theron out of her room and down the hallway, ignoring the servants who quickly looked away. She knew where she was going, knew it was probably a terrible idea. But she was done being passive, done accepting whatever scraps they threw at her. She walked straight to Kael's private quarters and pounded on the door. It opened almost immediately. Kael stood there in shirt sleeves, a half-empty glass in his hand, and exhaustion written across his face. Then he saw Theron's bleeding leg, and everything about him went lethal. Who did this? His voice was quiet, dangerous. I don't know, but they trashed my room, left a message telling me to leave. Arden met his eyes. You said anyone who interfered with me answers to you. I'm here to collect. For a moment she thought he might refuse, might tell her to deal with it herself, that he had more important things to worry about. Instead, he set down his glass and called for his head of security. What followed was swift and brutal. Within an hour, Kael had assembled the entire pack in the courtyard. He stood on the raised platform with Theron cradled in Arden's arms beside him, and he made a declaration that left no room for interpretation. Arden Vale is under my direct protection. She acts with my authority in all matters concerning my son. Anyone who touches her, threatens her, or interferes with her duties will answer to me personally, and I promise you, his gaze swept the crowd, and Arden saw more than one wolf flinch back. You won't enjoy it. She's not Pack, someone shouted from the crowd. She can't even shift. She saved my son's life when 24 of my trained warriors failed. That's worth more than shifting. Kael's voice cut through the muttering. This is not a debate. This is how things are. You don't have to like her, you just have to leave her alone. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly. But they dispersed. And when Arden walked back to her room, Kael had it cleaned and moved to a better location in the fortress, closer to his own quarters. No one spat at her. No one whispered loud enough for her to hear. They hated her. She could feel it rolling off them in waves. But they were afraid of Kael more than they hated her, and for now, that was enough. Theron fell asleep in her arms that night, exhausted from fear and pain. Arden held him and stared at the ceiling and wondered how long this fragile peace could possibly last. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the fortress in fresh white that made everything look clean and new. It was a beautiful lie, and Arden was just starting to understand how deep the rot underneath really went. The rot showed itself 3 weeks later, and it came wearing Gregor's face. Arden had fallen into a rhythm by then, mornings with Theron doing exercises to strengthen his healing leg, afternoons avoiding the pack as much as possible, evenings alone in her room trying not to think about how precarious her position really was. Theron was getting stronger. The physical wounds had mostly healed, but he still wouldn't shift back, still flinched away from his father, still watched the world through wolf eyes that held too much fear for a child. She was in the courtyard with him, coaxing him through a series of stretches Mira had taught her, when Gregor approached with 4 other council members flanking him like an honor guard. A word, Miss Vale, he said. His tone was polite. His eyes were not. Arden straightened, keeping herself between Gregor and Theron. I'm busy. This won't take long. He gestured to the fortress. Inside, if you don't mind. What we have to discuss isn't for public consumption. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, but the other council members were watching, and beyond them, a crowd was gathering. Refusing would look like weakness, like she was afraid. She was afraid, but she'd learned years ago not to let that stop her. Fine, but Theron comes with me. Of course. Gregor's smile didn't reach his eyes. We wouldn't dream of separating you. They led her to a small council chamber off the great hall, a cold room with a single table and chairs that had seen better days. Gregor took the head seat. The others arranged themselves around him. Arden stood with Theron pressed against her legs, refusing to sit even when offered. "What do you want?" she asked. "Direct. I appreciate that." Gregor folded his hands on the table. "We want to help you, Miss Vale. We want to help Theron." "By doing what exactly?" "By being realistic about the situation." One of the other council members spoke up, a lean woman named Saren with calculating eyes. "You've been caring for the boy for weeks now. He's physically healed, but the curse remains. He shows no signs of shifting back. He needs more time." "Time we don't have," Gregor interrupted. "The Blackwater Pack has crossed our southern border. Twice. Our patrols have been harassed, our scouts killed. We're on the brink of war, Miss Vale, and our Alpha is distracted." "That's not my fault, isn't it?" Saren leaned forward. "Kael spends hours every day checking on you and the boy. He's pulled our best warriors from border duty to guard your quarters. He's making decisions based on emotion rather than strategy. That's dangerous for all of us." Arden's jaw tightened. "So what are you suggesting?" "That you leave," Gregor said simply. "Take Theron with you. We'll provide supplies, safe passage to neutral territory, even gold if you need it. Just go." Kael would never agree to that. "Kael doesn't need to know until you're already gone." Gregor's expression hardened. "We're trying to do this the easy way, girl. Don't make us find a harder one." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Theron growled low in his throat, and Arden felt her own anger rising to match his. "You want me to kidnap the Alpha's son and disappear," she said flatly. "That's your brilliant plan." "We want you to save his life, because if you stay here, you're both going to die." Saren's voice dropped. "There are wolves in this pack who think Theron is already lost, who think the kindest thing would be to end his suffering before the curse kills him slowly. Right now, Kael's protection is keeping them at bay. But if war comes, if we're fighting on multiple fronts and people start dying," she shook her head, "that protection will crack. And when it does, we won't be able to stop what happens next." Arden looked at each of them in turn, searching for any hint of deception. What she saw instead was something worse, genuine belief. They actually thought they were helping, thought they were being pragmatic. "Get out," she said quietly. Gregor stood. "Think about it. You have 3 days. After that?" He shrugged. "After that, events will take their own course." They filed out, leaving Arden shaking with a fury she didn't know what to do with. Theron pressed against her, whining, and she realized her hands were clenched into fists hard enough that her nails had drawn blood from her palms. "It's okay," she whispered, though it wasn't. Nothing about this was okay. She needed to tell Kael, needed to warn him that his own council was plotting behind his back. But when she went looking for him, she found the fortress in chaos. Word had come from the southern border. A full Blackwater raiding party had attacked one of their outlying settlements. 6 wolves dead, a dozen injured, and the settlement burned to the ground. Kael was already gone, riding south with 50 warriors to assess the damage and send a message to Blackwater that such attacks wouldn't be tolerated. He'd be gone for at least a week, and Arden was alone. Skeets. The next 2 days passed in a haze of tension. Arden kept Theron close, rarely leaving her room except for meals. The fortress felt different with Kael gone, like something dangerous had been let off its leash. Wolves watched her with open hostility now, their hatred no longer tempered by fear of the Alpha's wrath. Mira came by on the second night, her face grim. "You need to be careful," the healer said, checking Theron's leg one more time even though it had fully healed. "Gregor's been holding meetings, private ones. I don't know what they're planning, but it's nothing good." "Let them plan," Arden said, though her voice shook slightly. "Kael will be back soon. And if he's not? If the Blackwater situation escalates and he has to stay south?" Mira gripped her shoulders. "Listen to me. I know you're brave. I know you want to prove yourself, but bravery without strategy is just suicide." "I'm not leaving." "Then at least prepare for the worst." Mira pressed something into her hand. A small knife, the blade wickedly sharp. Hide this. And if things go wrong, use it. After she left, Arden sat on her bed holding the knife and trying not to think about what things going wrong might look like. Theron curled up beside her, and she ran her fingers through his fur, taking comfort in the steady rhythm of his breathing. "We're going to be okay," she told him. "We just have to hold on a little longer." She wasn't sure which of them she was trying to convince. They came for her on the third night. Arden woke to the sound of her door being forced open. She had maybe 2 seconds to grab Theron before rough hands hauled her out of bed and slammed her against the wall. 4 wolves, all of them enforcers, all of them loyal to Gregor, surrounded her with expressions that promised violence. "Time's up," one of them said. "You're leaving, now." "I'm not going anywhere." The man backhanded her hard enough to split her lip. Theron snarled and lunged, but another enforcer kicked him away. The cub yelped and crashed into the far wall. "Stop!" Arden screamed, fighting against the hands holding her. "You're hurting him." "Should have thought of that before you refused our generous offer." The leader, a scarred brute named Damon, grabbed her by the throat. "We gave you a choice. You made it. Now we do this the hard way." They dragged her from the room with Theron limping after them, still snarling despite his injuries. Through the hallways, downstairs, past servants who quickly looked away. No one helped. No one even pretended to be surprised. This had been planned, coordinated. They took her to the same council chamber where Gregor had made his threat, and this time the entire council was present. Gregor sat at the head of the table looking almost regretful. Almost. "I wish you'd been reasonable," he said as Damon shoved Arden into a chair. "This could have been simple." "Where are you taking us?" "North. Beyond our territory to the neutral lands. You'll have supplies, enough to survive the winter if you're careful." He gestured, and Saren placed a heavy bag on the table. Gold, food, warm clothes, everything you need to start over. "And if I refuse?" "You don't get to refuse anymore." Gregor stood, moving around the table toward her. "You're a kind girl, Arden. I can see that. You care about Theron. So I'm going to be honest with you about what happens if you stay." He crouched down so they were eye level, and what she saw in his face made her blood run cold. "There are wolves in this pack who will kill you the moment they think they can get away with it. And there are wolves who will kill Theron too, out of mercy or spite, or just because he represents everything that's wrong with Kael's leadership." He paused. "I'm one of the few people holding them back, but my patience has limits. Kael is at the southern border dealing with a situation that's about to get much worse. By the time he returns, you'll be long gone. We'll tell him you fled in the night, took the boy with you. He'll be angry, but he'll understand, and eventually he'll move on." Gregor's voice went softer, almost kind. "This is the best outcome for everyone. You get to live, Theron gets to live, and Kael gets to be the leader this pack needs instead of a grieving father, drowning in impossible choices." Arden wanted to spit in his face, wanted to tell him exactly what she thought of his twisted logic. But Theron was being held by one of the enforcers, and the cub was shaking so hard she could see it from across the room. "How long do I have?" she asked quietly. "You leave within the hour. Damon and 2 others will escort you to the border." Gregor stood. "I'm sorry it came to this. Truly." He left, taking most of the council with him. Only Saren remained, watching Arden with those calculating eyes. "For what it's worth," the woman said, "I think you would have made a good Luna, in different circumstances." Then she was gone too, and Arden was left with Damon and his enforcers, and a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. They gave her 30 minutes to pack, escorted her back to her room, and watched while she gathered her meager belongings into the bag they'd provided. The knife Mira had given her was hidden in her boot. The only weapon she had, and probably useless against 4 trained wolves. Theron stayed pressed against her the entire time, his fear a palpable thing. He knew something was wrong, knew they were in danger. "It's going to be okay," Arden whispered, though she'd never told a bigger lie in her life. They left through a side gate, avoiding the main courtyard where questions might be asked. The night was brutally cold, the kind of cold that turned breath to ice and made your lungs ache. Damon led the way with Arden and Theron in the middle, 2 more enforcers bringing up the rear. They walked for hours through snow-covered forest, heading north toward the territorial boundary. No one spoke. The only sounds were boots crunching on snow and Theron's labored breathing as he struggled to keep up. Arden's mind raced, looking for options. She could run, but they'd catch her within minutes. She could fight, but 4 against 1 were terrible odds, even with the knife. She could scream for help, but there was no one out here to hear. She was trapped. Again, always trapped. They reached the boundary marker just before dawn, a line of stones painted white that stretched east to west as far as the eye could see. Beyond it was neutral territory, supposedly safe. In reality, it was just another kind of wilderness where survival was never guaranteed. Damon stopped and turned to face her. "This is where we leave you. Follow the deer trail northeast for about 5 miles and you'll hit an old trading post. Should be abandoned this time of year, but it'll give you shelter." He handed her a map. "After that, you're on your own." "What do I tell Kyle when he finds me?" Arden asked. "Because he will find me. He'll come looking for his son." "Tell him the truth, that we gave you a choice and you made it." Damon's expression was unreadable. "Tell him we were trying to save everyone, including him." He gestured to the other enforcers, and they turned to leave. Arden watched them go, her heart sinking. This was it. The end of her brief time pretending she mattered, that she was more than just a burden to be shuffled around. Then one of the enforcers, the youngest one, who'd barely spoken the entire trip, stopped and looked back. "Something's wrong," he said. Damon paused. "What?" "Listen." They all went still. At first Arden heard nothing but wind through trees, then faintly the sound of howls. Multiple wolves, and getting closer. Damon's hand went to his sword. "Blackwater scouts. They must have tracked us from the settlement attack." "We're still in our territory," one of the enforcers said nervously. "They wouldn't dare." The attack came from 3 directions at once. Wolves burst from the tree line, not scouts, but a full hunting pack, at least a dozen strong. They hit Damon's group with coordinated brutality, separating the enforcers and driving them apart. Arden heard screams, the clash of steel on claw, the wet sounds of tearing flesh. Someone grabbed her arm and yanked her backward. She stumbled, falling into the snow with Theron yelping beside her. Above her, 2 wolves fought in human form, their movements too fast to track. Blood sprayed across white snow, turning it crimson. "Run!" Damon's voice, hoarse and desperate. "Get the boy and run!" Arden didn't think, just grabbed Theron and ran. She crashed through underbrush, her lungs burning, branches tearing at her face and clothes. Behind her, the sounds of fighting grew more distant. Or maybe everyone was just dying. She didn't look back to find out. She ran until her legs gave out, until she collapsed in the snow, gasping and shaking. Theron pressed against her, whining. She could feel his terror matching her own. They were lost, separated from their escort, in neutral territory with Blackwater wolves hunting nearby, and no idea which direction led to safety. Arden pulled herself to her knees and tried to think through the panic. The map. She still had the map. She fumbled it out of her pocket with numb fingers and squinted at it in the growing dawn light. There, the trading post. If she could just reach it, they'd have shelter. Maybe supplies. Maybe a chance. She hauled herself up and started walking, every step an agony of exhaustion and fear. Theron limped beside her, his injured leg clearly bothering him again. She wanted to carry him but didn't have the strength. They walked for what felt like hours. The sun rose, weak and pale, through heavy clouds. Snow started falling again, thick flakes that erased their tracks, but also made it harder to see. Arden's feet were numb. Her hands were numb. Parts of her face had lost feeling entirely. She was going to die out here. They both were. Then through the white curtain of snow, she saw it. A dark shape that resolved into a building. The trading post. Still standing, though the roof sagged and one wall had partially collapsed. Arden sobbed with relief and stumbled toward it, dragging Theron with her. The door hung crooked on broken hinges. She shoved through and into a main room that smelled of mildew and rot, but was blessedly out of the wind. She collapsed against the far wall, pulling Theron into her arms. They huddled together while snow drifted in through gaps in the walls, and the building creaked ominously around them. "We made it," she whispered. "We're okay. We're okay." Theron whined and pressed closer. Arden knew she should get up, should search the building for supplies, see if there was anything useful, should figure out their next move, but exhaustion pinned her in place. dragging her down into darkness despite her attempts to fight it. Just a few minutes, she told herself. Just a few minutes to rest. She closed her eyes. What? She woke to the sound of footsteps. Arden jerked upright, her hand flying to the knife in her boot. Theron was already on his feet, hackles raised and growling at the doorway. A figure stood silhouetted against the pale light, too tall to be Gregor's enforcers, too still to be a Blackwater wolf on the hunt. Easy, a woman's voice said. I'm not here to hurt you. The figure stepped inside, and Arden got her first good look. A woman, maybe 40, with silver-streaked hair braided down her back, and eyes that were an unsettling shade of amber. She wore travel-worn clothes and carried a staff carved with symbols Arden didn't recognize. Who are you? Arden's voice came out rough, suspicious. Someone who's been looking for you, or more accurately, looking for him. The woman nodded at Theron. The cursed heir of the Draven pack. I've been tracking his trail for weeks. Why? Because I'm the one who can break the curse. The woman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. My name is Alara, and I think you and I need to have a very long conversation about what's really going on here. Arden's grip tightened on the knife. The curse can only be broken by true love and sacrifice. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows the simplified version, the story the witch told before she died. Alara moved closer, and Theron's growling intensified. But curses are complex things, girl. They have layers, conditions within conditions. The witch bound Theron to his wolf form until someone loved him enough to sacrifice everything for him, yes, but she also bound him to something else, something darker. What are you talking about? The curse doesn't just keep him trapped. It's killing him, slowly, from the inside out. Every day he stays in that form, his human self gets weaker. Eventually, there won't be anything left to shift back to. He'll be wolf forever, mind and body. No memory of who he was. Alara's expression was grave. You have maybe 3 months, 4 at most. After that, Theron dies, and the beast remains. The world tilted. Arden looked at Theron, seeing him with new horror. How do you know this? Because I was the witch's apprentice, before she went mad with grief and started cursing children to punish their fathers. Alara crouched down, making herself less threatening. I can break it, but not the way you think. The love and sacrifice part, that was never going to work. It was a false hope, the witch's last cruel joke. Then how? By replacing the curse with something else, a different binding, one that requires, she hesitated, a different kind of sacrifice. What kind? Alara met her eyes, and Arden saw something like pity in them. The kind where someone has to take Theron's place, become the cursed one so he can go free. The words landed like blows. Arden stared at her, unable to process what she was hearing. You want me to become cursed? To save him? I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm telling you what's possible. Alara stood. You have a choice. Let him die slowly over the next few months, or save him by taking the curse yourself. Either way, someone suffers. You just get to decide who. Theron was looking at her with those two aware eyes, and Arden saw understanding in them. He knew. Somehow, he knew what Alara was saying, and he was afraid. I need to think, Arden said. You have until nightfall. After that, I'm gone, and so is your chance to save him. Alara moved toward the door. Choose wisely, girl. Either way, nothing will ever be the same. She disappeared into the snow, leaving Arden alone with Theron and an impossible choice. Hours passed. Arden sat in the ruins of the trading post and tried to think rationally about what Alara had said. But rational thought was impossible when the alternative was watching Theron slowly lose himself until there was nothing left but an animal wearing his shape. She thought about Kael, about how he'd looked when Theron wouldn't let him close, about the hope she'd seen crack in his eyes every time his son flinched away. If she saved Theron, if she took the curse, Kael would get his son back. The pack would get their heir. Everything would be fine, except she'd be cursed instead. She didn't even know what that meant. Would she be trapped as a wolf too? Would she lose herself the same way Theron was losing himself? Alara hadn't specified, and that uncertainty terrified her. But then she looked at Theron, who'd crawled into her lap and was watching her with absolute trust, and she knew she'd already made her choice. She'd made it weeks ago, in a snowdrift, when she'd decided to save a dying cub, even though it meant her own death. She'd made it when she'd refused to run, refused to give up, refused to be one more person who abandoned someone who needed her. She'd always been disposable, always been the broken thing people threw away. Maybe it was time to choose that for herself, to make it mean something. "Okay," she said out loud, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff. "Okay." When Alara returned at dusk, Arden was waiting for her. "I'll do it," she said. "Take the curse. Save him." Alara studied her for a long moment. "You understand what you're giving up?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway. You might die." "I've been dying my whole life. At least this time it's for something that matters." Arden's voice was steady, even though her hands were shaking. "Just tell me, will he be okay? After? Will Theron remember me?" "He'll remember. And it'll hurt him. He'll blame himself." Alara's expression softened slightly. "But he'll live. He'll grow up. He'll be the person he was supposed to be." "Then do it." The ritual took less time than Arden expected. Alara drew symbols in the dirt floor with ash, placed Theron at the center, and had Arden kneel beside him. The witch's words were in a language Arden didn't understand, harsh and guttural, raising goosebumps on her arms. Then Alara pressed one hand to Theron's head and the other to Arden's, and pain exploded through her entire body. It felt like being ripped apart from the inside, like every cell was being rewritten, every nerve set on fire. Arden screamed, distantly aware of Theron screaming too, except his scream was changing, becoming human. The pain reached a crescendo and then vanished all at once, leaving Arden gasping on the cold floor. When she could see again, Theron was human. He was a small boy, maybe 7 or 8, with dark hair and blue eyes that were crying and afraid, but undeniably human. He stared at his hands like he'd never seen them before, then looked at Arden, and something in his expression broke. "What did you do?" he whispered. "What did you do?" Arden tried to answer, but her voice came out wrong, distorted. She looked down and saw fur where her hands should be, paws instead of fingers. The curse had transferred. She was the wolf now. "Take him back," Alara said, and Arden realized the witch was talking to someone else. She turned her head, clumsy in this new body, and saw Kael standing in the doorway with a dozen warriors behind him. He must have tracked them, must have followed when Gregor's plan fell apart. Kael's gaze swept the room, taking in Theron's human form, Arden's wolf shape, Alara's guilty expression. Understanding dawned slowly, then all at once. "No," he said. "No. Undo it." "Can't be undone," Alara said quietly. "She made her choice. She's a child. She doesn't understand." "She understands perfectly. She chose to save your son." Alara picked up her staff. "The curse will kill her in about 6 months. Maybe less. You should make sure she's comfortable." "Wait." Kael started forward, but Alara was already gone, vanishing into shadows, like she'd never been there at all. Kael knelt in front of Arden, his hands hovering like he wanted to touch her but didn't know how. "Arden, can you understand me?" She nodded. The movement felt strange, foreign. "Why would you do this?" His voice cracked. "Why would you sacrifice yourself for him?" Because no one had ever sacrificed anything for her. Because Theron had trusted her. Because for the first time in her miserable life, she'd had the power to save someone and she'd taken it. She couldn't say any of that, couldn't speak at all. So she just pressed her head against Kael's hand and hoped he understood. Theron threw himself at her, wrapping small human arms around her neck and sobbing into her fur. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't die. Please." Kael gathered them both up, his son and the girl who'd given everything to save him, and carried them out into the snow. The fortress was 3 days away. Arden had maybe 6 months to live, and somewhere in the ruins of that trading post, her human life ended and something else began. The journey back to the fortress was the longest 3 days of Kael's life, and Arden experienced every moment of it trapped inside a body that didn't belong to her. She rode in Kael's arms because her wolf legs couldn't match the pace of mounted warriors. Theron refused to leave her side, walking beside Kael's horse even when exhaustion made him stumble. The boy barely spoke, just stared at Arden with eyes full of guilt so heavy it looked like it might crush him. "It's not your fault," Kyle told him on the second night as they made camp. "You didn't ask her to do this. She did it for me." Theron's voice was small, raw. "She's dying because of me. She's dying because she made a choice, a brave, stupid, impossible choice." Cale's jaw tightened as he looked at Arden, who lay by the fire trying to figure out how to exist in this form. "We're going to find a way to fix this." But Arden could see the doubt in his eyes, could hear it in the careful way he phrased things, like he was trying to convince himself as much as Theron. She wanted to tell him it was okay, that she'd known what she was doing, that watching Theron become human again, seeing him whole and alive, was worth whatever came next. But all she could do was whine softly and press her muzzle against Theron's hand. The boy buried his face in her fur and cried himself to sleep. When they reached the fortress on the third day, the entire pack was waiting. Word had spread somehow about Theron's transformation, about Arden's sacrifice, about everything. They lined the courtyard in silence as Kyle rode through the gates with a human boy and a cursed wolf. Gregor stood at the front of the crowd, his face carved from stone. He met Kyle's eyes for one long moment, then deliberately looked away. Coward, Arden thought with a viciousness that surprised her. This was his fault, his plan. If he hadn't tried to force her out, she never would have been in that trading post when Alara found them. Kale dismounted and lifted Arden down carefully. She stood on shaking legs, unused to the weight distribution, the way her center of balance had shifted. Theron pressed against her side immediately. "Inside," Kale said. "Now." He led them to his private quarters, a suite of rooms Arden had never seen before, all dark wood and stone and sparse furnishings. He deposited Arden on a fur rug near the fireplace and sent for Mira. The healer arrived within minutes, took one look at Arden, and went pale. "Tell me you can fix this," Kyle said. Mira knelt beside Arden, her hands glowing with that blue healing light as she examined her. After a long silence, she shook her head. "I can ease her discomfort, keep her comfortable, but I can't break a curse this powerful. No one can. There has to be a way. If there is, I don't know it." Mira's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm sorry, Alpha. All we can do is make sure her remaining time is as good as possible." Remaining time. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Kale's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Arden thought he might break something. Instead, he took a deep breath and nodded. "Do what you can. And find me every book on curses we have in the library. Every scroll, every scrap of information. There has to be something." After Mira left, Kyle paced the room like a caged animal, while Theron sat beside Arden stroking her fur with trembling hands. Finally, the Alpha stopped and looked at them both. "I need to address the pack," he said. "They need to understand what happened, what she did." His gaze locked on Arden. "You saved my son. That makes you pack now, no matter what form you're in. Do you understand?" Arden's tail moved slightly, the closest she could come to nodding. "Good. Then let's make sure everyone else understands, too." He gathered them up and carried Arden back to the Great Hall, where the pack had assembled in tense, murmuring clusters. Silence fell as Kyle climbed onto the platform with Theron and Arden. "Some of you know what happened," Kyle said, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive room. "Some of you only know rumors, so let me give you facts. 3 days ago, Arden Vale sacrificed herself to break the curse on my son. She took it into her own body so that Theron could be free." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Arden saw shock, disbelief, even skepticism on some faces. "She was packless," Kyle continued, "broken, cast out by her birth family and traded like livestock. Every wolf in this room would have left her to die in the snow. But she didn't leave my son to die. She saved him, twice." His voice hardened. "And now she's paying the price for our failures. For a council that thought exile was easier than courage. For a pack that treated her like trash instead of the hero she is." Gregor stepped forward, his face flushed. "Alpha, with respect, you don't get to speak." Kyle's voice cracked like a whip. "You tried to force her out. You sent her into danger. And when she fixed the problem you created, you want credit for wisdom? He leaned forward, and wolves in the front rows stepped back instinctively. You're off the council, Gregor, effective immediately. Anyone who helped you plan that exile can join you. You can't do that. I just did. Challenge me if you disagree. Gregor's mouth snapped shut. No one challenged an Alpha King unless they wanted to die, and whatever else Gregor was, he wasn't suicidal. Kael turned back to the pack. Ardenvale is under my protection. She will be treated with the respect due to someone who saved our heir. Anyone who harms her, threatens her, or shows her anything less than honor will answer to me personally. He paused. And when she dies, she will be buried with full pack honors, as family, because that's what she earned. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, one wolf dropped to one knee. Then another. Then another. Within moments, the entire pack was kneeling, a gesture of respect usually reserved for the alpha himself. Arden stared at them, her wolf heart hammering. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? Recognition, respect, to matter. It felt hollow knowing it had come at the cost of her life. Theron's hand found her fur, and she leaned into him, taking what comfort she could. Later, when the pack had dispersed and night had fallen, she lay in Kael's quarters trying to sleep. Theron had curled up beside her, refusing to leave despite Kael's gentle insistence that he needed his own bed. I'm staying with her, the boy had said with a stubbornness that reminded Arden painfully of his father. She stayed with me when I was cursed. I'm staying with her. Kael hadn't argued further. Now the Alpha sat at his desk surrounded by books and scrolls, searching desperately for something that didn't exist. Arden could hear him muttering to himself, occasionally cursing when another source turned out to be useless. She wanted to tell him to stop, to sleep, that she'd made her peace with dying and he needed to do the same. But she had no voice anymore, just this body that grew heavier and more foreign with each passing hour. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, dragging her down into dreams where she had hands instead of paws and a voice that could say all the things trapped inside her chest. She woke to shouting. Dawn light streamed through the windows, and Kael was on his feet, staring at one of the ancient books Mira had brought him. His expression was wild, almost manic. What is it? Mira had arrived sometime during the night and was dozing in a chair. She jerked awake at Kael's exclamation. This! Kael shoved the book at her. Right here, a counter curse. It's complicated and dangerous and might not work, but it's a chance, Mira finished, scanning the page. Her eyes widened. This is dark magic, Alpha, the kind that requires... She trailed off, looking at him sharply. You'd have to give up something significant, something that matters. I don't care. It says here the price is determined by the curse's strength. For something this powerful, the cost could be enormous. Mira's voice dropped. You could lose your wolf, your power, your life. I said I don't care. Kael's voice was steel. She saved my son. I'm not letting her die if there's any other option. Theron had woken up during the commotion and was watching his father with something like awe. Arden's heart, wolf or not, twisted in her chest. It has to be performed at the place where the original curse was cast, Mira said, still reading. And it requires the willing participation of both the cursed and the one attempting the counter-curse. Then we go back to the trading post. Kael looked at Arden. If you're willing to try, I won't force you. This is your choice. Arden's choice. Like any of this had ever really been her choice. But she understood what he was asking. Was she willing to let him risk himself for her? The broken, packless girl who'd been a burden her entire life? She stood on shaking legs and walked over to Kael, pressed her head against his hand in the only agreement she could give. His fingers tangled in her fur, and she felt them trembling. We leave within the hour, he said. They rode hard and fast, a small group this time. Just Kael, Theron, Mira, and 2 guards. The journey that had taken 3 days they completed in 2, pushing through exhaustion and bitter cold. The trading post looked even more desolate in daylight. Half collapsed, abandoned, the symbols from Alara's ritual still visible on the dirt floor. Mira set to work immediately, redrawing symbols and mixing components from the pack she'd brought. Kael stood beside Arden, his expression grim. This might not work, he said quietly. And if it does, I might lose my ability to shift, might lose my power. The pack could reject me as alpha. Arden made a sound low in her throat. She wanted to tell him not to do it, that she wasn't worth that price. Don't, Kyle said, reading her perfectly. Don't try to tell me you're not worth it. You saved my son. You gave up everything. That makes you worth more than any crown or title I've ever held. Theron wrapped his arms around Arden's neck. Please let him try, please. I can't lose you too. Too. The word carried the weight of his mother's death, of months spent trapped and afraid, of a lifetime of loss compressed into 7 years. Arden lowered her head in submission, in agreement. It's ready, Mira said. She'd drawn an elaborate circle around Arden and cleared a space for Kale opposite her. Alpha, you need to understand, this could kill you. The magic required to break a curse this strong is immense. If your body can't handle it, I understand. Do it. Mira began to chant. The language was different from what Alara had used, older, rougher, like rocks grinding together. The air grew heavy, pressing down on Arden until she could barely breathe. Kale stepped into the circle, and pain exploded through both of them. It was worse than the first curse, worse than anything Arden had ever experienced. She felt like she was being unmade, torn apart at a molecular level while simultaneously being rebuilt. Kale was screaming. She could hear him even over her own agony. And distantly she was aware of Theron crying, of Mira's chanting growing more desperate. The pain reached a crescendo, and Arden felt something inside her break. The curse, maybe. Or her body finally giving up. She couldn't tell. Then everything went dark. When consciousness returned, she was lying on cold ground, staring up at wooden rafters. Her body felt wrong, all the weight in the wrong places, limbs too long and joints bending at unfamiliar angles. She lifted her hand, with fingers and skin and no fur, and stared at it in disbelief. Arden? Theron's voice thick with tears. Arden, can you hear me? She turned her head and saw him kneeling beside her, his face streaked with dirt and hope. Behind him, Mira looked exhausted but relieved. It worked, the healer said. You're human again. Arden tried to speak, and this time words came out. Rough and hoarse, but words. Kyle? Theron's expression crumpled. He pointed to the other side of the circle where Kale lay motionless, his skin gray and his breathing shallow. The curse took too much from him, Mira said quietly. He's alive, but barely. I don't know if he'll wake up. Arden dragged herself across the floor to Kale's side. Up close, she could see the damage. His veins stood out dark against his skin, and his hands were cold to the touch. Whatever he'd given up to break her curse, it had nearly destroyed him. You idiot, she whispered, taking his hand. You stupid, noble idiot. His eyes flickered open, just barely. When he saw her human face, something like peace crossed his expression. Worth it, he managed, his voice barely audible. Then his eyes closed again, and no amount of shaking or calling his name would open them. Mira worked over him for hours, pouring healing magic into his body, while Arden held his hand and Theron watched with terrified eyes. The guards they'd brought stood at the doorway, their faces grave. Finally, as the sun began to set, Mira sat back with a sigh. He'll live, she said, but his wolf is gone, completely. He's human now, just human. The words landed like stones. An alpha without his wolf was no alpha at all. Kyle had traded his power, his identity, his entire way of life to save her. Can he still lead the pack? One of the guards asked. I don't know, Mira admitted. That's up to the pack to decide. They carried Kyle back to the fortress on a stretcher, Arden walking beside him the entire way. Her legs were shaky after months in wolf form, her balance uncertain, but she refused to ride while he lay unconscious. Theron stayed close to her, his small hand gripping hers like a lifeline. When they reached the fortress gates, the pack was waiting again. Word must have spread about what Kyle had done, about the price he'd paid. Gregor stood at the front, his expression unreadable. As Kyle's unconscious form was carried past, the old wolf dropped to one knee. The alpha sacrificed his wolf to save a packmate, he said loudly, addressing the crowd. That's the kind of leader I failed to see, failed to support. He looked up at the stretcher, then at Arden. I was wrong, about him, about you, and I'm sorry. One by one, the rest of the pack knelt. Not out of obligation this time, but genuine respect. For an alpha who'd given up everything for someone who'd given up everything for his son. It was a circle of sacrifice that had somehow transformed them all. They took Kyle to his quarters, and Mira continued treating him through the night. Arden refused to leave his side, sitting in a chair by his bed while Theron dozed fitfully on the floor nearby. "You should rest," Mira told her. "You're still recovering too." "I'll rest when he wakes up." Stubborn girl. But Mira said it with affection, not reproach. Kale woke 3 days later. Arden was half asleep in her chair when she heard him groan. She jerked upright to find him blinking at the ceiling, his expression confused. "You're awake," she said, her voice breaking with relief. He turned his head slowly and looked at her, really looked at her, taking in her human face, her trembling hands, the tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're alive," he said, and his voice was filled with wonder. "It worked. You almost died, you idiot. You gave up your wolf, your power, everything." She was crying harder now, unable to stop. "Why would you do that?" "Because you did it first." He reached for her hand, his grip weak but steady. "Because watching you fade away was worse than losing any power I've ever had." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Because you matter, Arden Vale. You've always mattered. And I was tired of watching people who matter get thrown away like they don't." Theron stirred and woke, saw his father conscious, and launched himself at the bed. Kale caught him one-armed and held him close, and Arden watched them together, father and son. Both saved, both scarred, but alive and whole in the ways that counted. "What happens now?" she asked. "Can you still lead the pack without your wolf?" "I don't know," Kyle admitted. "The pack laws are complicated, but we'll figure it out." He looked at her again, and something in his expression shifted. "Together, if you'll stay." "I don't have anywhere else to go." "That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if you want to stay, if you want to be part of this pack, part of this family." He paused. "Part of my life." Arden's breath caught. She thought about everything that had led to this moment, every rejection, every abandonment, every time she'd been told she was worthless. And she thought about how Kyle and Theron looked at her like she was the opposite of worthless, like she was essential. "Yes," she said, "I want to stay." Theron's whoop of joy made them both laugh, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Arden felt something that might have been hope. The Pack Council met the following week to discuss Kyle's status. There was debate, heated debate about whether a human could lead a wolf pack, whether tradition allowed it, whether the pack would accept it. But Gregor stood and spoke in Kyle's defense, recounting his sacrifice and his years of strong leadership. Saren followed, then others. One by one, council members who'd once schemed against him now advocated for him to keep his position. In the end, the vote was unanimous. Kale would remain alpha, wolf or not. Though as Gregor pointed out, he'd need a strong beta to handle certain ceremonial duties, someone who could shift and represent the pack's wolf heritage. They chose Marcus, the head of security, a steady, loyal wolf who'd always supported Kyle. And they chose to create a new position, one that had never existed in pack hierarchy before. They called it Luna, and they offered it to Arden. "I can't shift," she protested when Kyle told her. I wasn't born to this pack." "Neither was my mother," Kyle said. "She came from outside and she became one of our greatest leaders." His hand found hers. "You saved my son, saved me. You've earned your place here 100 times over. The question is whether you want it." Arden looked around the room where the council had gathered, saw respect on faces that had once shown only contempt, saw Theron watching her with hope bright in his eyes. She thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, broken, unwanted, convinced she'd die alone in the snow. That girl was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that sacrifice and courage could transform not just yourself, but everyone around you. "I want it," she said. The pack gathered for her ceremony 3 days later. They marked her with the traditional symbols, spoke the ancient words, and accepted her as Luna, the heart of the pack, the balance to Kyle's authority. When it was done and she stood before them all, Arden felt something she'd never felt before, like she belonged, like she'd finally found the place where broken things could be remade into something new. Kyle took her hand, Theron beamed at her side, and the pack howled their approval into the winter sky. It wasn't a perfect ending. Kael still struggled with the loss of his wolf. Theron still had nightmares about the curse. Arden still felt out of place sometimes, still caught herself waiting for the other shoe to drop. But they were healing. Together. And for the first time in her life, Arden believed that might actually be enough. Spring came late to the north that year, and when it finally arrived, it brought more than melting snow. Arden stood at the fortress walls watching the southern road, where dust rose in clouds that meant riders. A lot of them. She'd been Luna for 3 months now, and in that time she'd learned to read danger the way she once read contempt in people's eyes. This was danger. How many? Kael appeared beside her, his human senses less sharp than they used to be, but his tactical mind still razor-keen. 20, maybe 30. Arden squinted against the sun. Flying Blackwater colors. Kael's jaw tightened. The Blackwater pack hadn't been idle during the winter. They'd pushed harder at the borders, testing defenses, probing for weakness. They knew Kael had lost his wolf, knew the Draven pack was vulnerable in ways it hadn't been for generations. Marcus, Kael called down to the courtyard. Full guard assembly, now! Within minutes, the fortress was alive with controlled chaos. Warriors armed themselves, archers took positions on the walls, and the pack's non-combatants moved to the interior chambers. Arden wanted to join them, wanted to get Theron to safety, but the boy refused. I'm staying with you, he said, his jaw set in that stubborn way that was pure Kael. I'm not hiding anymore. Theron, I'm the heir. They need to see me. He looked up at her with eyes too old for his face. You taught me that. Being brave when it's hard. Arden's throat tightened. She'd taught him nothing deliberately, but somehow the kid had learned anyway. Stay behind me, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood. The Blackwater contingent reached the gates as the sun hit its peak. At their head rode a woman Arden recognized from descriptions. Alpha Sienna Blackwater, all sharp edges and controlled violence. She dismounted with fluid grace and approached the gates alone, a show of either confidence or arrogance. I'm here to speak with Alpha Draven, she called up. Under truce banner. Kael appeared at the wall's edge, and Arden saw Sienna's eyes widen slightly at his human form. News traveled, but seeing it was different. Speak then, Kael said. You're on my land. Make it quick. I'm here to offer terms. Sienna's voice carried clearly in the still air. Your pack is weakened. You've lost your wolf, lost your power. The southern territories are ripe for the taking, and we both know you can't hold them. Get to the point. Merge our packs. You step down as Alpha, I take leadership of the combined forces, and your people get protection they desperately need. She smiled, and it was all teeth. It's generous, Kael. More generous than you deserve after the damage your father did to my family. My father's crimes aren't mine to answer for. Aren't they? You inherited his power, his territory, his title. Sienna's voice went hard. He killed my brother, took our eastern lands through treachery and violence, and now his son wants to pretend none of that matters? The courtyard had gone silent. Every wolf was watching, waiting to see how their human alpha would respond to this challenge. Kael was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady. Your brother challenged my father for those lands and lost. That's pack law. As for the rest, yes, my father was brutal. He made enemies. He hurt people. He paused. But I am not him, and I will not surrender my pack to settle his debts. Then you're a fool. Sienna gestured, and her warriors moved forward as one. I gave you a chance to do this peacefully. Remember that. They're going to attack, Marcus said from beside Arden, right here in broad daylight. Not attack, Arden said, watching Sienna's face. Challenge. She's going to invoke Alpha Challenge. She was right. Sienna's voice rang out clear and formal. Kael Draven, I challenge you for leadership of this pack. Combat to submission or death as tradition demands. The word sent ice through Arden's veins. Alpha Challenge was sacred, inviolable. Any wolf could invoke it, and the challenged Alpha had to accept or forfeit their position. It was designed to ensure only the strongest led. And Kael was human now. No enhanced strength, no accelerated healing, no wolf form to call on. Against Sienna, he'd be ripped apart. You can't accept, Arden said urgently. She'll kill you. If I don't accept, the pack loses everything, including their respect for me. Kael looked at her and she saw acceptance in his eyes. I knew this would come eventually. Hoped we'd have more time, but there has to be another way. There isn't. Pack law is clear. He touched her face gently. Take care of Theron. And tell him I'm proud of him. Don't you dare, Arden hissed. Don't you dare say goodbye like this is decided. But Kael was already climbing down the wall, already moving toward the gates. Marcus opened them with visible reluctance, and Kael walked out alone to face Sienna. The Blackwater Alpha smiled. I was hoping you'd be stupid enough to accept. Strip down. Shift. Let's do this properly. I can't shift, Kael said quietly. I gave up my wolf to break a curse. I'm human now, just human. Sienna's smile widened. Even better. This'll be quick. She shifted in a blur of motion, her wolf form massive and dark, easily twice the size of any normal wolf. Kael stood his ground, unarmed and impossibly small in comparison. Arden watched in horror as Sienna circled him, toying with him. This wasn't a fight. This was an execution. Then Theron was running past her, through the gates, into the clearing. No! Arden lunged after him, but Marcus caught her. Let me go! She'll kill him! Wait, Marcus said. Look! Theron had planted himself between Kael and Sienna, his small body shaking, but his voice strong. You can't challenge him. He's not the Alpha anymore. Sienna shifted back to human form, her expression confused. What are you talking about, boy? Pack law says an Alpha who loses their wolf loses their title, Theron said, the words clearly rehearsed, probably something he'd learned from Mira or one of the elders. My father lost his wolf 3 months ago. The Pack Council voted to let him keep leadership duties, but technically he's not Alpha anymore. I am. Arden's heart stopped. Kael spun to stare at his son, shock written across his face. And since I'm a child, Theron continued, his voice only shaking a little, Pack law says challenges against me can be answered by a champion, someone who fights in my place. Sienna laughed. Clever boy. But it won't help. Everyone knows your father is the strongest warrior you have. With him human, who else could possibly— Me, Arden said, stepping through the gates. I'll be his champion. The silence that followed was absolute. Sienna looked her up and down, taking in her human form, her lack of weapons, her slight build. You? You can't even shift. You're not pack-born. You're— Luna, Arden interrupted. Chosen by this pack, marked by tradition. And according to pack law, a Luna can serve as champion for the heir. Or did you forget that part? She hadn't forgotten. Nobody had. The law was ancient, rarely invoked, but unbreakable. A Luna could fight for an underage heir if the situation demanded it. Sienna's expression went from amused to furious. You'll die. Maybe, but not without a fight. Arden looked at Kael, who was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Trust me, please. For a long moment she thought he'd refuse, thought he'd overrule Theron's claim, accept the challenge himself, die heroically while she watched. Instead, he stepped back. She speaks for my son, for our pack. I accept her as champion. Sienna snarled, the sound inhuman even in her human form. Fine. I'll kill you instead, little Luna. Then I'll kill the boy. Then I'll take everything your broken pack has left. She shifted again, and this time she didn't circle. Just launched herself straight at Arden with killing intent. Arden had been preparing for this moment since the day she'd become Luna, had spent every spare hour training with Marcus and the pack warriors, learning to fight without claws or fangs, learning to use her human form's advantages, speed, unpredictability, the fact that everyone underestimated her. She rolled under Sienna's initial attack and came up with a knife in each hand, the ceremonial blades given to every Luna, sharp enough to cut through wolfhide if you knew where to strike. Sienna landed and spun, confused that her prey wasn't dead. Arden didn't give her time to think. She darted in, slashing at the exposed throat. The blade drew blood, but not enough. Sienna was too fast, too experienced. The wolf's jaws snapped shut inches from Arden's face. She twisted away, feeling teeth graze her shoulder. Pain exploded through her arm, but she kept moving, had to keep moving. The second she stopped, she was dead. They circled each other, Arden bleeding, Sienna growling low and angry. The Blackwater wolves were shouting encouragement. The Draven pack was silent, terrified. Arden could feel exhaustion creeping in. She wasn't built for extended combat, couldn't heal the way shifters did. Every wound weakened her, while Sienna barely seemed winded. She needed an advantage, needed something Sienna wouldn't expect, so she did the stupidest thing possible. She threw both knives away. Sienna's eyes widened in surprise, then delight. She lunged, jaws wide, going for the throat. Arden dropped flat and rolled, pulling the hidden third blade from her boot, the one Mira had given her months ago, the one everyone had forgotten about. She came up inside Sienna's guard and drove it up under the wolf's jaw, angling for the brain. Sienna screamed, a horrible sound that was half wolf, half human. She thrashed, trying to shake Arden off, but Arden held on with desperate strength, twisting the blade deeper. "Yield," Arden gasped. "Yield or die." For a moment she thought Sienna would choose death, choose to drag them both down rather than submit. Then the wolf went limp, shifting back to human form with the blade still embedded in her throat. "I yield," Sienna choked out. "You win." Arden pulled the blade free and stumbled back, her vision swimming. Around her the Draven pack was erupting in cheers. The Blackwater wolves looked stunned, their unbeatable alpha defeated by a human who couldn't shift. Kael was at her side immediately, catching her as her legs gave out. "You insane, brilliant woman, what were you thinking?" "That I wasn't losing you," Arden managed. "Not to her, not to anyone." Theron crashed into them both, crying and laughing at the same time. "You did it! You won!" Sienna dragged herself to her feet, one hand pressed to her bleeding throat. Her eyes were full of hate, but also grudging respect. "The challenge is satisfied. The boy keeps his title. You keep your pack." "And you?" Kael asked. "We go home, lick our wounds, live to fight another day." She gestured to her wolves, who helped her mount her horse. Before she left, she looked back at Arden. "You fight dirty." "I fight to win," Arden said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Sienna smiled, but it was pained. "Maybe not. Either way, little Luna, you've earned my respect. That's a rare thing." She rode away with her contingent, leaving the Draven pack standing in shocked silence. Then Gregor started to howl, a victory call that the entire pack took up, dozens of voices joining in triumph. Even Kael, who couldn't shift, tilted his head back and added his human voice to the chorus. Arden stood in the center of it all, bleeding and exhausted and more alive than she'd ever felt. That night, the pack threw a celebration that lasted until dawn. Warriors who'd once sneered at Arden now bought her drinks and swapped fighting stories. Council members who'd tried to exile her praised her courage. Even Saren approached with a stiff apology and an offer of friendship. Arden accepted it all with weary grace, too tired to hold grudges. Besides, she understood better now. They hadn't hated her personally. They'd hated what she represented: change, uncertainty, the collapse of old certainties. But she'd proven herself, not through strength or bloodline, but through courage, through being willing to do what needed doing, even when it was terrifying. She found Kael on the fortress walls, looking out at the dark forest. He didn't turn when she approached, but she saw him smile. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saving us. Again. You saved me first. Multiple times." Arden leaned against the stone beside him. "I'm just evening the score. You could have died down there. Sienna is one of the most dangerous alphas in the north. But I didn't die. I won." She looked at him. "Because you taught me something. You and Theron both." "What's that?" "That strength isn't about how hard you can hit or whether you can shift. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice, what you're willing to endure." Her voice softened. "You gave up your wolf for me. The least I could do was fight one wolf for you." Kael turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight she could see emotions playing across his face, too complex to name. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said weeks ago. If this is about pack politics, I swear, it's not about politics. It's about you. About us." He took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her skin. "When you took that curse for Theron, when you were dying slowly in wolf form, I realized something. I didn't want to lose you, not as Luna, not as Theron's guardian, as you." Arden's breath caught. "Kael, I love you," he said simply. "I don't know when it started. Maybe when you stood up to Gregor the first time. Maybe when you refused to abandon Theron even when it would have been easier. Maybe the moment you walked into my fortress covered in snow and impossible courage. He smiled. But I know I love you now. And I needed you to know that before another crisis hits, before something else tries to kill us. She should have been surprised, should have needed time to process. But the truth was, she'd known, had felt it in every look, every touch, every impossible thing he'd done to keep her alive. I love you too, she said, even though you're reckless and stubborn and gave up your wolf like an idiot. I'd do it again. I know, that's what scares me. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she might break. She kissed him back fiercely, pouring everything she couldn't say into the contact, all her fear and relief and desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd earned their happy ending. When they pulled apart, Theron was standing in the doorway with the biggest grin Arden had ever seen. Finally, the boy said, I was wondering when you two would figure it out. How long have you been standing there? Kyle asked. Long enough. Theron bounded over and wedged himself between them. So does this mean Arden is my mom now? Officially? Arden's heart stuttered. Theron, that's not… I wouldn't presume… I'd like it if you were, the boy said seriously. My real mom is gone. And you've taken care of me better than anyone. You died for me. Or almost died. You know what I mean. She looked at Kyle, who nodded. If you want to be. No pressure. But the offer stands. Arden thought about her own mother, who turned away when she'd been traded off. Thought about all the ways families could break and all the ways they could be rebuilt. I'd like that, she whispered. I'd like that a lot. They stood together on the walls, the three of them, while below the pack celebrated and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The weeks that followed brought more changes. Kael officially stepped down as Alpha, passing the title to Theron with Arden and Marcus serving as regents until the boy came of age. It was unprecedented, but after everything that had happened, the pack was ready for unprecedented. Gregor apologized publicly and offered to mentor Theron in pack politics. Saren took over training the female warriors, with Arden as her assistant. Mira expanded the healer's wing and started accepting students from other packs, turning the fortress into a place of learning as well as strength. And Arden started a project of her own. She called it the Refuge, a place within the fortress grounds for broken shifters, ones who couldn't shift, who'd been cast out by their packs, who had nowhere else to go. She remembered too well what that felt like, remembered the cold certainty that she'd die alone and unmourned. No one else would feel that way if she could help it. The first arrival was a teenage girl from the Eastern Territories thrown out for being too weak. The second was an older man whose wolf had been damaged in an accident. Then more came, slowly at first, then in a steady trickle. They weren't warriors, weren't powerful, but Arden gave them work, gave them purpose, gave them a place where broken didn't mean worthless. Kale watched her with quiet pride. You're building something important here. I'm building what I needed when I was 17 and alone, Arden said. A place where being different doesn't mean being disposable. Your father's pack. Have you thought about… No. Her voice was flat. They made their choice. I've made mine. I'm not going back there. Not ever. He didn't push, just pulled her close and let her lean on him while they watched her refugees slowly, carefully start to believe they might actually be safe here. 6 months after the challenge, Kael asked her to marry him properly. Not for pack politics or alliance, but because he wanted to. Because he loved her and wanted everyone to know it. She said yes immediately, then burst into tears, which mortified her until Kael admitted he was crying too. They married in the spring under cherry blossoms that Mira had somehow coaxed into blooming despite the harsh climate. Theron served as ring bearer and cried through the entire ceremony. Half the pack cried with him. When it was done and Arden stood beside Kael wearing the traditional Luna crown, flowers and silver and ancient symbols of protection. She looked out at the gathered wolves and felt something settle in her chest. Belonging. Purpose. Home. Things she'd thought she'd never have. Happy, Kael whispered. Terrified, she admitted. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? Then we'll fail together and figure out what comes next. He squeezed her hand. That's what family does. Family. The word used to hurt. Now it felt like armor. The celebration lasted 3 days. Packs from across the north sent representatives, some out of respect, some out of curiosity about the Luna who had defeated Sienna Blackwater with nothing but knives and stubbornness. On the final night, Arden slipped away from the festivities and climbed to the highest tower. She needed a moment alone, needed to process everything that had happened in the last year. She'd gone from broken outcast to Luna, from cursed to champion, from dying alone to surrounded by people who actually cared whether she lived or died. It felt impossible, like someone else's life. There you are? Mira climbed up beside her, slightly winded. Hiding from your own party? Just thinking. About? Arden gestured at the fortress below, where wolves were dancing and drinking and celebrating. About how I ended up here. About how easily it could have gone differently. But it didn't. Mira's voice was gentle. You made choices, Arden. Hard choices. Brave choices. This isn't luck or fate. This is what you earned. I don't feel like I earned it. I feel like I stumbled through a year of disasters and somehow came out the other side. That's called surviving. And you're exceptionally good at it. Mira touched her shoulder. Your refugees look up to you because you understand them. The pack respects you because you fought for them. Kael loves you because you're you, stubborn and brave and refusing to give up even when you probably should. She smiled. You earned every bit of this. Stop waiting for someone to take it away. After Mira left, Arden stayed on the tower watching the celebration, watching her family, her pack, her home. She thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, standing in a courtyard while her father sold her like livestock. That girl had been so certain she'd die alone, die worthless. But she'd been wrong. She'd survived, fought, loved, sacrificed, and in doing so, had transformed not just herself, but everyone around her. The broken daughter had become a queen, and the harshest land in the north had learned that sometimes the unwanted ones were exactly what the world needed most. Arden went back down to join the celebration, to dance with her husband and laugh with her son and toast with her pack. The future was uncertain, it always was. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of it. She'd survived winter, survived curses, survived being thrown away and remade and broken down and built back up. Whatever came next, she'd survive that too. And she wouldn't do it alone. The North had tested her in every way possible and found her strong enough, found her worthy, found her exactly what they needed, even if they hadn't known it at first. The unwanted daughter had finally found her place, and she intended to keep it.